When I was young, there was a fella went by the name of Jacques de Gautier.
Norm Macdonald is even more genius than you ever knew, and he proves it in this clip. Norm Macdonald tells the most convoluted joke ever, a famous clip uploaded by the Team Coco YouTube channel from a Conan late night show which aired on May 21st, 2014. You may have heard this joke before. It has to do with feeding baby dolphins, if that rings a bell. Now, I can't show the joke in its entirety here, however, what I will try to demonstrate in this video is how Norm Macdonald is even more of a comic genius than you could ever have imagined, and how he uses his unbelievable intellect, wisdom, and knowledge to sneak Canadian references and a history lesson into his 3-minute shaggy dog story about a man he once knew from his childhood, Jacques de Gautier.
Jacques de Gautier. And he was from Témiscaming, Quebec.
So the first Canadian reference we get is this location of Témiscaming, Quebec, and indeed it is a very real place. Norm likely only uses it because it's an obscure place and perhaps a bit unusual sounding, especially to an American audience unfamiliar with the blend of First Nations and French-Canadian place names, which is actually pretty common in Canada. Témiscaming, Quebec is a small town of only about 2,000 people, which mostly found production in logging the thick forests and milling lumber back in the day, then sending it down the Ottawa River towards the nation's capital and other more populated areas for use there. There are numerous places with the Témiscaming name in Quebec and Ontario, including Lake Témiscaming, about 100 kilometers upriver, and the name comes from Algonquin words meaning deep and open body of water. The Wikipedia article for the town of Témiscaming actually includes a blurb about this joke under an in popular culture section. I hope no one removes it now that I've mentioned it here. Now, Norm himself was actually born in Quebec City, which is quite a ways away from Témiscaming, Quebec. About 600 kilometers away, in fact, and in a completely different region of Quebec. However, it is worth noting that Témiscaming has quite a high English-speaking population, at least relatively. Roughly 30% of the town speak English as a first language, which is uncommon for towns in Quebec. Meanwhile, Norm Macdonald, growing up in Quebec City, would have been one of few Anglophone minorities in the city, so he could certainly relate to the sort of ongoing battles and tensions between Anglophones and Francophones throughout the province. But in any manner, Norm's allusions to Jacques de Gautier from Témiscaming, Quebec was likely mostly a way for him to entertain himself whilst telling this classic shaggy dog story.
And he was, while I was scrambling to get out of high school, Jacques Zagatineau had already...
I think he just changed his last name.
Well, you know, a man grows. But this is the point.
But back to the Canadiana. The deepest Canadian lore Norm snuck into this joke takes place in this next part, where Norm lists off 3 names with whom he compares the protagonist, now renamed and grown into Jacques de Gatineau.
Jacques de Gatineau, he went to McGill University and he got 3 degrees, by golly, and he went over across the pond to the fellers with Cambridge and he even stood up to them. Mm-hmm. And we thought, boy, he's going to be the next. We had Jean Marchand, Gérald Pertier, Pierre Trudeau, the 3 wise men of Quebec. By God, Jacques de Gatineau was going to be the next.
Give me the next gun.
Yeah, but he vanished.
Now at a first listen, this just sounds like Norm is making up a few French-Canadian sounding names and adding in one which people might recognize, Pierre Trudeau, to further build the joke, continue entertaining himself, and tease the audience throughout the story. I'm actually not sure how many American viewers would even have recognized Pierre Trudeau as a name, since this joke was originally told in 2014, a full year before Pierre's son, Justin Trudeau, was elected Prime Minister of Canada. But either way, Trudeau's name is more recognizable than the other 2. But here's the thing, Jean Marchand, Gérald Pelletier, and Pierre Trudeau actually were three real people, three real French-Canadian politicians, and were collectively known as the three Wise Men of Quebec. Norm wasn't joking about this, or at least not making it up. These three men were born in the late 1910s and rose to prominence in local Quebec politics during the 1949 asbestos strike, which took place in a Quebec town literally named Asbestos. I know that itself might sound like a joke as well, but it's true. This asbestos strike was a pretty typical strike of that era. The asbestos miners wanted more money and better conditions, meanwhile the mine owners said no. The Premier of Quebec at the time, Maurice Duplessis, supported the mine owners, and the strike was deemed illegal. I'm skipping a lot, but at the end of the day, the miners barely got much that they wanted, and the wealthy mine owners pretty much won again. But the French-Canadian lads, Jean Marchand, Gérald Pelletier, and Pierre Trudeau, who were all around 30 years old at the time, rose to prominence in Quebec as leaders of the striking movement, representing the poor and trodden down working class. This is particularly ironic because Pierre Trudeau himself was far from working class. His own father was actually a wealthy mine owner and industrialist himself, who passed away when Pierre was about 16 years old. Pierre Trudeau inherited about $5,000 from his late father at the time, which is about $100,000 today. So imagine having that kind of money when you were in your teens and 20s, and how much it would help you get involved in all sorts of strange and unusual activism or political movements, if you so wish to do so. Anyways, a few years later, when Quebec's separatist sentiment was flaring up, Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson recruited these three Wisemen of Quebec to join his Liberal Party as a way to give the Quebecois some representation in the government and attempt to stifle or at least slow down this Quebec separatist sentiment. Anyways, this maybe or maybe didn't work, and eventually led to all sorts of nonsense that I won't get into in this video. But it also led to Pierre Trudeau himself becoming Prime Minister for 15 years, and later on his son, Justin Trudeau, becoming Prime Minister for nearly another 10 years. The lesser-known Jean Marchand served in various cabinet positions under the Trudeau government, while Gérald Pelletier also served as a cabinet minister numerous times, as well as the Canadian ambassador to France and to the United Nations. So for three seemingly throwaway names that Norm uses to build the joke, the reality is learning about these names offers an incredible deep dive into mid-century French-Canadian history, whose impacts are still being felt to this very day. I wonder what Norm would think about the state of Canada today. Oh yeah, one more little tidbit. The town of Asbestos, Quebec has since renamed itself to Val des Sources, which means Valley of the Springs, in an attempt to move away from the negative associations with asbestos. This only happened in 2020, so they did keep the asbestos name for quite a long time. But anyways, let's get back to the next interesting part of the joke.
And one time I was in Niagara Falls, and I went over to the Sea World there. You know how they have the Sea World? With the different fish.
I didn't know that, but okay, yes.
Beluga.
The Sea World, I've been
Sure.
there many a time.
Okay, so I was checking out the beluga whales and stuff, and I look over, and who do you think I see?
I hope it's that guy.
No, it was just an attendant, but he showed me to the place I wanted to see, which is where they feed the little baby dolphins, because I love dolphins, And who do I see there but Jacques de Gatineau? And here he is, he's feeding the baby dolphins.
So this part of the joke is one place where Norm likely misspeaks. He mentions SeaWorld, a name for numerous marine theme parks throughout America and the world. However, he specifically names Niagara Falls as the location of this park. In reality, there is no SeaWorld in Niagara Falls. Rather, there is a park called Marineland. Marineland is very famous to anyone who grew up or lived in Ontario for any period of time, and in fact is one of the most controversial of all animal parks in Canada. You see, Marineland was founded in 1961 by a fellow named John Holer, a Slovenian immigrant to Canada. It's just a few kilometers outside of the main Niagara Falls attractions and downtown area, which made it quite a great location for a day trip or outing with the family. You know, you go check out the amazing Niagara Falls and you head over to Marineland for the day. Marineland aired many commercials throughout the years, which promoted their new rides, particularly the Sky Screamer or Arctic Cove, and most pertinently to Norm's joke, they would often advertise their beluga whales. Norm almost gets mad at Conan for not knowing that Marineland had beluga whales, and I suppose this shows just how commonly known the park is in Canada, while Americans are more likely to know places like their own SeaWorld Orlando. But indeed, Marineland has long been controversial for its keeping of marine animals, especially mammals like orcas, dolphins, and the aforementioned beluga whales. They're trained to perform in your typical marine animal show, you know, jumping through rings and all that stuff, but the park has received a lot of criticism for its quality of care, probably even much more criticism than other parks of the same nature. One common story is that they fed the grizzly bears in the park a regular diet of marshmallows, which is perhaps not their preferred diet. Some of the stories are pretty upsetting and strange and not worth getting into here, but the point is this. Marineland is a real place in Niagara Falls, and probably what Norm was trying to reference in this joke. For what it's worth, the jingle that plays at the end of Marineland commercials was often lampooned by many a young Canadian growing up by singing instead, "Everyone hates Marineland." In perhaps better news, the park ended up closing in 2024 and has been in all this legal hullabaloo ever since. The founder, that John Holer guy, passed away in 2018, and the park just really couldn't maintain itself after he passed away. Plus, with Canada's exploding population, the value of land in southern Ontario, where Niagara Falls is located, is just way too high to justify running some kind of unusual theme park and all the costs of keeping marine animals and whatnot. Even now with the park closed, there are still like 30 beluga whales living there. There's this whole thing in the news about where to send them. China tried acquiring them, but the government of Canada refused for one reason or another, and now it looks like they might be sent to the United States, but that's all still being fleshed out. So there are still some employees, like a skeleton crew, working in the now closed Marineland, just keeping the remaining animals alive, which is kind of crazy and a bit unsettling to think about. The place was always controversial, and it's probably for the best that it's shutting down and the animals are leaving, and so on and so forth.
All of Témiscaming, Quebec, pinned our hopes on you. Now that's a hell of a burden for a man to have a town's hope pinned on them, isn't it, Conan?
It is a big burden.
So he was feeding these baby dolphins, you know, and I said, "I'm ashamed of you, Jacques Gatineau. You could have done so many great things." And he said, "Well," he said, "I think I'm serving a youthful porpoise." Now, I believe that...
So there, my friends, is the deep, hidden lore in Canadian history that Norm referenced and snuck into his youthful porpoise joke, the most convoluted joke ever, as Conan's YouTube channel describes it, and how Norm's genius may be even greater than you ever imagined. If you enjoyed this look at strange and unusual Canadian topics, then please subscribe. I just started this channel and I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers so I can start monetizing the videos and making some cool videos, which frankly I've been meaning to make for many years now.
More Quebecois humor.
I'm looking forward to exploring many more Canadian topics, including weird history, explainers for Canadiana, the crazy cost of housing crisis, all sorts of Canadian stuff, and who knows what else. So thanks for being one of the first 1,000 subscribers. Remember to turn the light off on your way upstairs tonight, and have a good night.